Now, Travis, so I mean, you've studied with judo coaches and jujitsu coaches all over the world, but you kind of settled on John as your jujitsu coach. What was it that led you to him?
Um, there's a lot of coaches out there that they they don't really understand what it is they're teaching. Like they
Yeah,
have kind of like an idea, but the one thing John was able to do was when I came to class, whatever John was teaching after 5 or 6 times of drilling it or 5 or 6 minutes, it worked during the later half of the class. It
yeah,
wasn't this mythical move that I had to do for 6 months to eventually get on a white belt. It was like, no, even at the highest level, even with the purple belts, the brown belts, and some of the black belts, you could find yourself in those positions and getting 80 to 90% of the way there, if not all the way by the end of class. And it was just the way he conveyed it, taught it, watched the classes, put everything together that just, it made sense to me specifically. Maybe not to other people, but to me, and that's why I was able to pick it up so quickly. It was
yeah.
just,
Okay.
it just makes sense.
I think for me, and one of the reasons why John has resonated so well with our viewers is that he has just this way of articulating what's going on and showing and demonstrating it in a way that you haven't thought of. I watched John teach the Juji Katami today. While I enjoyed it, I found it incredibly frustrating because I was just going back on all the mistakes that I've made over the years. Like, how did I not know this? Because there's so much conflicting information that you hear, even the more that you study. Keep your legs apart, keep them together. And he explained the biomechanics of every bit of it and why they worked. And I felt like, yeah, I could go out there and be better with it right away. And yeah, just amazing. I mean, John, what is it about your background that you think allows you to articulate things in a way that's so different from
I,
the way other
I
teachers
I
do
think
it?
it's very important that whenever you demonstrate a given move, that you have to be able to give cogent and practical reasons why things are the way you teach them. Okay. If someone comes to me and asks me to demonstrate a move, the first thing I'm going to start doing is first they got to see what the move is. And then once there's a broad outline of the move, you got to start explaining to them why things are done as they are. If you can't give a rational set of reasons as to why things are done that way, something's wrong. It either means the move as you're teaching it maybe is based on some flawed assumptions, things that maybe you just picked up over the years that had never really been tested, and may not even be important. Um, or it may mean that you simply lack knowledge of the technique. Maybe you you can do it, but you can't explain it to someone else. But the moment you can give a rational reason why things are done as they are, that's when people can start to pick things up quickly. People will forget most information very, very rapidly, but they don't tend to forget when they're given a reason why they ought to do something. They tend to remember the why much better than they remember just simple directions. Always what I'm trying to do is to get people to think in terms of what are they supposed to be doing in the broad sense. So they have a general sense of direction. So once you give someone a sense of direction, the details can always be added on afterwards. But if you just throw details at people, they just get forgotten as quickly as they get learned.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you first give them a sense of, okay, here's the big picture, what we're trying to accomplish, here's some details to help you accomplish that, and here's why those details are the way they are. If you attack every problem on those three levels, big picture, details, and a set of reasons why the details are as they are, people tend to not only remember more of the information they're given, but they can act upon it more quickly because they know in general what they're supposed to be doing and they can move towards a goal. What you can't have is someone who just forgot everything from 10 minutes ago and now they've got a guy jumping on top of them. They don't even have the beginnings of an idea where to go. They're trying to remember detail here. Where should my left foot be? Where should my right foot be? And this guy's all over them. Of course, you just go back to what you've always been doing. But if you give someone a general picture, okay, and you, let's say for case in the case of Judigatami, and we talk about the position of my cross face leg. What should my cross face leg be doing? And and its position on the shoulder, far shoulder, near shoulder, the very things that we demonstrate on today's filming. People can remember things like this very easily. And they may not get the details 100% correct, but that's not the idea. The idea is not to be 100% correct the first time you try it. The idea is to get someone in the ballpark. And once they're in the ballpark, they can always get closer and closer to the goal over time. But what stops people's progress is when they just get shut out. They learn a new move, it looks exciting, they try it, and there's just total failure.
Yeah, yeah,
That's when they're just like, yeah, I won't even bother.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, but if they can get a sense where they can see possibility for the future, they'll persist. They'll learn more about it, and they'll add to their knowledge willingly. But when there's just complete failure from the outset, that's when everything goes wrong. So my whole interest as a coach is to get people beginning to succeed so they can feel potential in a move. If someone can feel potential, they will persist with it over time. They'll even come up with things on their own. They'll innovate. They'll research on their own time. They'll ask me more questions, and in time, over a series of weeks or months, in Travis's case, days, they'll get damn good at that move.
yeah. I think that's a lot more effective than when you tell someone why, rather than when someone asks the coach, "Well, why do you put your foot on the shoulder?" and they say,
Yeah,
"Yeah, that's
yeah.
not. It's not
Now
going
it
to
can't
resonate nearly
all
as
be
well."
theoretical knowledge. You can't just all just be throwing
Yeah,
concepts at people. At some point, you got to give them practical information. You got to go. There's a guy on top of you trying to punch you in the face. How do you stop him? So there has to be this interface between practical details on the one hand and a sense of direction on the other. What's the big picture here? What are we trying to accomplish? And when you get those two smoothed out and working together, that's when magic starts to happen. That's when you get people learning at a very fast rate.
Sin-
I think the last thing I'd want to talk about is that.
One second.
Yeah, sure.
Since you went down that
Yeah,
road, and I know a lot of people struggle with this, and a lot of coaches struggle with this for their athletes, but it's something I always try to convey to my students, and I use throughout my career, and I've heard you say is, where do you draw the line between adding the what if scenarios on top of each other versus bringing it back down to our base level of just, we got to get back to the basics and strengthen the foundation versus continually adding on new moves and new processes and different techniques
Mm.
to really build a player up.
Um, there's two ways you can go with accumulating knowledge in any combat sport. You can go with breadth of knowledge, where you try to learn a little bit about a lot. And you can go with depth of knowledge, where you try to learn a lot about a few things. The general pattern in combat sports is this: in order to defend yourself from the huge number of possible attacks that your opponent can bring upon you, it's important that you have breadth of knowledge. You have to know a little bit about a lot. Because if I know even a little bit, I can anticipate an attack coming. And anticipation is always the first line of defense. If I can see what the beginnings of an armbar looks like, even if I have a lousy armbar, I can see the setup, I can avoid it. So, as far as defense goes, knowing a little bit about a lot is a huge benefit. But when it comes to offense, the exact opposite is true. Then you've got to select a small number of moves and have a huge amount of knowledge about those small number of moves. That's why my coaching style is always built around offensive systems. Essentially, I really teach 6 different submission holds, and I build extravagant systems around those 6. When one of my students gets into a battle over one of those submission holds, whether it be Kimura, a heel hook, or what have you, they know so much more in that isolated domain than their opponents that even when they've only been training 4 or 5 years and their opponent has 20 years, the amount of knowledge they've accrued and the amount of experience they've accrued in that one specific position is vastly greater than that 20-year veteran has. And so what we do is we create these knowledge wars in isolated areas where we have vastly more knowledge and skill in those isolated areas, even if we're less skilled overall than the opponent.
Yeah, we do the same thing in judo where our gripping system tends to bring people into a world that they don't understand the fight that they're
Mm,
in, and they don't know where to fight, where to defend, where to be offensive, when to attack, and it tends to break down our opponents when we're doing judo.
excellent.
So how do you have your players bring people into that world?
You've got to have a set of basic entries from any given position. Now, the good news is if you operate with a sense of direction, it's pretty easy under most circumstances to pull an opponent into a given realm. You'll recognize this, of course, from gripping. If you just want an overback grip, let's say your throw required an overback grip, it's not that difficult to engineer a gripping sequence which accesses your opponent's back. If I want to get into my opponent's legs, it's not that difficult for me to go through gripping sequences which give me inside position and elevation, and I'm in my opponent's
Mhm.
legs. If I want a front headlock, it's not a difficult thing for me to fake legs, bring the head down, snap downs, et cetera, and I've got a front headlock. That sense of direction, along with some fairly simple, easily learned techniques to get into the scenarios we favor, is not a difficult thing. And you see that obviously in judo with grip fighting too. Um, for example, I think it's fair to say that it's a hell of a lot easier to teach someone grip fighting sequences in the standing position in judo than it is to teach throws.
Yes.
Um, Someone who's an incompetent thrower can be a damn good gripper and
Correct.
can make themselves a real menace in the standing position just on grips.
Yeah.
So too in jiu-jitsu down on the ground, someone who had a guard which in some ways might seem quite deficient can nonetheless be very, very good at engaging in grips and elevating an opponent and getting into their legs. So you create this bias where when my students go out and see an opponent in front of them, they're so programmed as to what they want to do to get into legs, kimura, front headlock, etc., that they can engage in a gripping uh, uh, scenario where most of the action is going to be taken in towards those six systems that we favor.
Now, what happens when one of your players is needs to also play defense to the other person's realm or series of attacks that may avoid the scenario you're trying to be
That's
in?
a great question, and that leads us on to our next video series.
Oh,
Um, we're about to complete the Into the System series with the armbar, and after that, we're going to go into fundamentals. One thing I always say to my students is this: which one of the systems which I teach, as far as attacks goes, you favor the most? I leave that up to the students. Some will like these, some will like this. That's individual preference. But one thing I'll never let you go with is the fundamentals. Okay, if you don't have strong escapes, if you don't have a guard that is difficult to pass, if you don't have strong guard passing skills and all the essential skills of the sport, I don't care how good you are at the systems, at some point, someone's going to find a way to resist them and your game's going to get shut down. He's going to take you into territory that now you're unfamiliar with and you're going to get beaten. Um, I always put a very, very high priority, especially in the early years, on people having a strong sense of the fundamentals of the sport. Systems-based approach to jiu-jitsu is wonderful. I made it my life's work, but all of that is worthless without a strong underpinning in the essential skills of the sport. Things like guard retention, guard passing. It's difficult to even conceive of someone who would be successful in the sport who didn't have a strong guard retention, who didn't have an ability to get past their opponent's legs, or at least put so much pressure on their opponent with those movements that they had to react in some way which set up your offense back into the systems that I teach. Um, so always there's this juxtaposition between the need for strong fundamentals across the board, which I won't let a student get by without. And then on the one hand, once they've mastered that, building on top of that with the idea of preference and choice, where they get a choice between offensive systems, of which I focus mostly on six.
Well, John's organization to his approach is really kind of unprecedented. I mean, the whole part about thinking in systems, I know Travis has adapted a lot of it. Travis has a gripping system, Travis has throwing systems, and look at the success. And I think that what Jimmy, who's Travis's judo coach, talked to me about one time was that systems give you the ability to be more predictable, meaning you stop once you have good systems, you stop losing the people that you shouldn't be losing to.
Yeah,
Do you guys find that true with the consistency?
absolutely. And also, interestingly, they make your opponents more predictable.
Yeah.
Because once you put them into a system, every time you go to enact step A of the system, that restricts their possible reactions to it. Now you know pretty much ahead of time what they're going to be doing.
Sure.
By the time you get down steps B, C, D, and E, they've only got one or two options left. And so your opponents become predictable. You become more predictable to watch as an athlete. Everyone knows what you're doing. The outcomes of your matches become more predictable. You win more. And interestingly, the actions of even the most chaotic opponents start to become more predictable. You start to realize, hey, if I put this guy in step A, he's only got 5 options. If I go further into step B, he's down to 3 options. C, now he's down to 2 options. And then that's when you start winning on a consistent level.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for being here. One thing I want to say before these guys leave is that it's my role. I have a very good job. I have a very fun job, and I get to meet the best jujitsu people in the world, the best grapplers. And if I were to name, and I'm saying this publicly, the 2 people that I would say are the smartest people that I know about grappling, the first 2 would come to mind are the 2 guys to my right here. And I think that what that illustrates is that knowledge is cumulative. I mean, talking about both people here have a really strong multidisciplinary approach. And I think it kind of really speaks to the point that the more you learn, the more the whole picture starts to make sense. Would you both say that's true?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a sad world if you thought that any one grappling style was the whole picture of the sport. You got to go outside of gym. Of course, it's
Yeah.
good to have one style you focus on, but it's good to have an area of specialty. But you're always limiting yourself if you just say that's the whole story of the game. Go out and study wrestling, go out and study judo, go out and study sambo. They've all got fascinating additions. I never saw anyone in jiu-jitsu who got worse by studying judo or wrestling
For
or
sure.
sambo. I only saw people who got better.
For sure.
Welcome to Mastering the Move, the knee cut guard pass. When it comes to selecting methods of guard passing, there are some clear criteria that might influence our decision. The goal of this video is to show how knee cut guard passing can in most cases be reduced to a pretty simple 3-part structure. First, gain an advantageous start position. Second, control opposite shoulder and hip, usually via underhook control on the far side of the body and good knee position on the near side. Third, control the outcome, usually via head position, and the fact that the opponent has very little purchase on the knee cutting leg. The knee cut has always been among the most successful and practical guard passes in Jiu-Jitsu. It is a staple among my students, and I am very confident that it will get great results for you too.